Welcome, Mr. President, both presidents, in fact. We would like to start with a short video, then we're going to rise to the occasion.
Africa has a unique chance to build forward better from the COVID-19 crisis. Before the pandemic, Africa was home to 6 of the world's fastest growing economies. Today, the pandemic has caused the first recession in 25 years for most African countries. It has shown how exposed Africa is to other disasters, including climate change.
We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build forward better from this COVID crisis. Nowhere is this more critical than in Africa, the continent on the front line of our climate emergency.
Africa needs global solidarity on climate change. Solidarity to boost Africa's resources and capacities to adapt to climate change. The African Adaptation Acceleration Program will build on what is working and speed up the actualization of the African Adaptation Initiative of the African Union.
On the 6th of April, more than 30 heads of state and global leaders committed to priority actions to help African countries adapt to the impacts of climate change. They have rallied behind the bold, new Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program. Jointly developed by the African Development Bank and the Global Center on Adaptation, the program aims to mobilize $25 billion to accelerate climate change adaptation actions across Africa.
I've asked all G7 members to increase the share of climate finance allocated to adaptation and resilience to at least 50% of their total climate finance.
To address the current health and economic crisis and the climate crisis, many countries in Africa will need support from the international community. For this reason, we are calling for a comprehensive approach that would include domestic and international measures.
Together, we can avoid the worst effects of climate change while helping billions of people adapt to our changing world.
However, globally, only 10% of global climate finance goes to adaptation, and just 19% of this comes to Africa. The African Development Bank is particularly committed to achieving parity between adaptation finance and mitigation finance.
This program, ladies and gentlemen, I believe will go a long way to support countries like Kenya to scale up climate adaptation and resilience and to provide significant resources for climate adaptation throughout Africa and indeed throughout the Caribbean, the Pacific, and most of the global South.
We have to insist that equal attention be paid to adaptation and mitigation in climate finance.
Il s'agit notamment des solutions fondées sur la nature, la transition énergétique, le cadre de transparence renforcé, le transfert des technologies et les financements climatiques.
Developed countries are expected to provide $100 billion annually for climate finance, and a greater share of this should go to climate adaptation, because climate change adaptation is a key element of Africa's green and resilient recovery plan.
So, Excellencies, we're all living inside the eye of the storm, and as we have heard before earlier this week, no one is safe. The climate emergency has the world at the crossroads. We either delay, pay and suffer, or we plan, adapt and thrive. My name is Patrick Verkooyen, and I'm the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation. And then we just had President Tshisekedi, we had Secretary General Guterres here with us at the start of the meeting. Actually, the start was delayed. And unfortunately, he had another commitment. He said, my heart as Secretary General is with Africa. My heart is with you, President Tshisekedi, and the rest of African leaders. Count on his support. So I'm also here to convey Secretary General Guterres a message on that, because As climate change hits home across the globe now, there is one region, and one region only, which is suffering more than any other: Africa. A continent which has done little to cause this problem is bearing the brunt of the consequences. There is a fundamental climate injustice which needs to be repaired, and it needs to be repaired here in Glasgow. Last week with President Kenyatta, I launched our State and Trends on Adaptation in Africa report. Kristalina was there, and Gozi, you joined. And it had one very simple message. Investing in climate adaptation, it makes economic sense. It is not only the right thing to do, it is the economic smart thing to do. Why? Because investing $1 in, say, climate-smart crops in most African countries will see a return on its investment between $2 and $14. Africa is full of adaptation solutions. What they need, two things: scale, and they need speed. That is why last April, during a so-called COVID climate emergency meeting, world leaders, you gathered to endorse the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, AAAP. The AAAP is different than anything what has been done before. Why? Because it avoids the duplication and confusion of a myriad of initiatives on the continent. It harnesses digital solutions for agriculture. It restores degraded lands. It brings to scale the power of the private sector. And it leverages new green jobs. But the most important thing is the AAAP is Africa's plan. Africa-owned, Africa-led. And endorsed globally. All development partners in the room endorsed the AAAP. So yes, we need to reduce our carbon footprint, of course. That's what we're doing here in Glasgow and beyond. But at the same time, we need to adapt and increase financing for adaptation. And that's why I'm so honored also to work side by side by my, quite frankly, big brother, President Adesina, who has conceptualized not only the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, but also put $12.5 billion down. What we need now is to find the remaining balance of that missing $12.5 billion. Today's meeting is convened by not only a leader from Africa, but by a global leader. A leader who has put adaptation at the heart of the recovery of COVID. A leader who is running and chairing the African Union. President Tshisekedi, can you please come to the podium, please?
Merci. Excellences, Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, Monsieur le Président de la COP26, malheureusement, Monsieur le Secrétaire général n'est pas là. J'avais réservé une salutation pour lui. Monsieur le Président du groupe de la Banque africaine de développement, Madame la Directrice générale du Fonds monétaire international, Monsieur le coprésident de la Fondation Bill et Melinda Gates, Monsieur le Président exécutif du Fonds Bezos pour la Terre, Madame la Directrice générale de l'Organisation mondiale du commerce, Mesdames et Messieurs, distingués invités. J'ai le plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cet important sommet que j'ai convoqué en ma qualité de président en exercice de l'Union africaine. Je remercie pour leur ferme soutien et pour l'organisation de cet événement les Nations Unies, la présidence de la COP26, l'initiative d'adaptation pour l'Afrique, le Centre mondial pour l'adaptation et la Banque africaine de développement. La semaine dernière, j'ai lancé un appel à l'action dans l'éditorial de Financial Times, indiquant que l'Afrique en avait assez d'attendre de l'aide pour faire face aux défis, aux impacts de plus en plus dévastateurs du changement climatique. Le temps des discours s'est écoulé. Nous devons agir et agir maintenant. Votre réponse à mon invitation témoigne de votre engagement à renforcer ensemble la résilience de l'Afrique face au changement climatique. Mesdames et messieurs, distingués invités, la combinaison de la Covid-19 et des impacts climatiques a gravement ébranlé nos économies. Néanmoins, les pays africains intensifient leurs efforts d'adaptation pour la réalisation des ODD. Pour un continent qui contribue à hauteur d'environ 3% des émissions de gaz à effet de serre, l'Afrique ne peut pas être livrée à elle-même pour en gérer les effets de plus en plus néfastes. Comparé aux besoins, le flux de financement actuel en direction de l'Afrique pour l'adaptation est nettement insuffisant. Les initiatives existantes ont montré leurs limites face à l'accélération de l'adaptation. Nous en avons assez, je disais, des actions fragmentées qui chevauchent les domaines d'intervention et épuisent les ressources limitées des nations et des institutions africaines. Nous devons faire les choses différemment, de manière à permettre au continent africain de transposer l'adaptation à grande échelle et de l'accélérer. Continuer comme nous le faisons jusqu'ici pour financer et mettre en œuvre l'adaptation ne fera que creuser l'écart entre le financement de l'adaptation et le financement de l'atténuation. Je m'attends à la présente conférence des parties que nous tracions une trajectoire claire pour mobiliser les énormes ressources nécessaires pour soutenir ceux qui se trouvent sur la ligne de front du changement climatique, en particulier en Afrique. Chaque pays, chaque institution représentée ici à cette réunion, aujourd'hui, doit repartir avec ce message. La lutte contre le changement climatique ne peut pas être gagnée si elle n'est pas gagnée en Afrique. Mesdames et messieurs, distingués invités, comprendre cela et agir en conséquence, telle est la réaction que je veux voir aujourd'hui. L'Union africaine appuie fermement et présente le programme d'accélération de l'adaptation de l'Afrique, élaboré et mis en œuvre conjointement par le Centre mondial pour l'adaptation et la Banque africaine de développement. Ce programme porte sur l'essentiel des besoins de l'Afrique en matière de changement climatique. Il appartient à l'Afrique et est dirigé par l'Afrique. Les nations africaines l'ont approuvé en tant que mécanisme privilégié du continent pour la mise en œuvre de l'adaptation. Le programme s'appuie sur la vision et le plan de travail de l'initiative pour l'adaptation en Afrique. Il intervient à un moment crucial et vise à faire face au triple impact de la Covid-19, du changement climatique et de la pire récession depuis 25 ans. Le programme entend mobiliser 12,5 milliards de dollars, en plus des 12,5 milliards de dollars déjà engagés par la Banque africaine de développement pour l'adaptation d'ici 2025. Je félicite mon ami et frère Akinwumi Adesina pour ses efforts inlassables dans le renforcement de la résilience en Afrique. Il est éminemment important que la COP27 en Afrique réalise l'objectif des 12,5 milliards de dollars supplémentaires nécessaires pour le programme d'accélération et de l'adaptation en Afrique. C'est un programme qui devrait servir d'exemple emblématique à d'autres. 25 milliards de dollars sur 5 ans ne suffisent certainement pas à combler le déficit de financement de l'adaptation en Afrique. Mais c'est un montant plancher et non un montant plafond. Et il contribuera à créer la confiance et à susciter l'espoir. Mesdames et messieurs, distingués invités, l'Union africaine soutient les 2 mécanismes de financement mis en place pour l'exécution de ce programme. Le mécanisme en amont, hébergé au Centre mondial pour l'adaptation, financera les changements structurants en matière d'adaptation, la recherche et les politiques ainsi que les meilleures pratiques scientifiques et de résilience nécessaires. Il permettra de mettre en œuvre les recommandations du rapport 2021 sur l'état et les tendances en Afrique du Centre mondial pour l'adaptation, lancé la semaine dernière par le président Uhuru Kenyatta. Le mécanisme en amont apportera une contribution importante en tirant parti des possibilités d'investissement identifiées et des ratios coûts-avantages positifs qu'elle présente. Ce mécanisme nécessite 250 millions de dollars sur 5 ans. La facilité d'investissement qui sera hébergée à la Banque africaine de développement déploiera de multiples instruments novateurs pour mobiliser les financements auprès de plusieurs sources, y compris nos gouvernements nationaux, afin de recevoir et de gérer 12,5 milliards de dollars. Mesdames et messieurs, distingués invités, le programme d'accélération de l'adaptation en Afrique est un mécanisme crucial qui devrait déployer une part importante des 100 milliards de dollars par an promis aux pays en développement. En conclusion, bien que nous discutions de l'adaptation et de la résilience, nous devons également protéger les forêts et les océans africains qui servent de puits de carbone naturel. Il est temps que l'Afrique soit indemnisée pour le bien de la planète. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, not only for your message of hope, but also particularly for your message of action, and that Africa is taking the matters in its own hand and just needs partnerships to deliver at scale and speed indeed. The next speaker who I'd like to introduce, is actually, he doesn't need an introduction. For those who haven't worked with him personally, this man is full of energy, super bold, 24/7 switched on, President Adesina, co-convener of the AAAP. Please.
Thank you very much, my dear brother Patrick. Actually, he works so hard. If you work for Patrick, he will call you at 4 a.m. in the morning. So I don't know how he does it, but he has renewable energy, I can tell you that. Your Excellency, President Felix Tshisekedi, Chairperson of the African Union and President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Excellencies, heads of states and government, Mr. Secretary General, he was here, as he was just said, but he gave us his heart, and we know that you're here with us in this particular fight that we are doing for climate change. So thank you very much for coming. The COP President, Alok Sharma, thank you for all you do. Honorable Ministers, my 2 there sisters, I cannot forget to always mention them, the Managing Director of IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, and my big sister, Ngozi, the Director General of WTO, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here today. It never rains, it pours. It suddenly is pouring with challenges of climate change in Africa. Cyclones in southern Africa claimed over 1,000 lives and caused damage of over $2 billion from Mozambique to Malawi and Zimbabwe. Droughts in East Africa dried up crops. Desert locusts destroy food production on 1 million hectares. Floods in East Africa claimed 430 lives and affected more than 700,000 people. Across the Sahel, desertification and erosion pose great risks. Coastal countries, especially small island states such as Seychelles, Comoros, and Cabo Verde, face coastal erosion. The cost of erosion to the West African coastline alone is $3.8 billion. Africa loses $7 to $15 billion a year due to climate change, which could rise to $50 billion a year by 2040. The continent will need $336 billion to adapt to climate change. And this does not include several billion dollars needed to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa simply cannot breathe. It is raining, it is pouring, with floods of fiscal challenges. Africa, which accounts for not more than 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, is now the most vulnerable region in the world to climate change. Yet Africa receives only 3% of global climate finance. The African Development Bank has been at the forefront of the climate agenda for Africa. The bank will double its climate finance to $25 billion by 2025. We will devote 40% of our total investments to climate. I want to thank the UK government and my dear friend Alok Sharma, the COP26 president, for the UK government's recent decision to provide a guarantee of $2 billion to the African Development Bank to help it leverage its balance sheet and to further expand climate financing, especially for adaptation. I would like to thank you very, very much, and all of the UK government. And Honourable Minister, thank you very much. I saw you yesterday. I'm most grateful. This will help us to do more. We are sharply focusing on adaptation. I am pleased that the African Development Bank Group is the only multilateral development bank to have achieved and exceeded parity for adaptation. We surpassed 50-50% parity between adaptation and mitigation in 2018 and reached 55% and 63% for climate adaptation in 2019 and 2020, respectively. We were greatly honored that the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres praised our leadership on global adaptation for the climate in his speech at the United Nations General Assembly when he said, the African Development Bank set the bar by devoting 50% of its climate finance to adaptation. All should do so. To further accelerate delivery of more financial resources for adaptation in Africa, the African Development Bank and the Global Center for Adaptation have launched the African Adaptation Acceleration Program. Our target is to mobilize $25 billion for climate adaptation. As His Excellency, my dear brother, President Tshisekedi mentioned in his eloquent and powerful address, the African Development Bank has committed already $12.5 billion towards the program. Your Excellencies, Africa is here with 50% equity. We need 50% equity commitments of the balance of $12.5 billion from developed partner countries. The African Development Banks work together with the Global Center for Adaptation program. This Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program is a game changer for Africa to develop impacts at scale and to deliver fast, as was mentioned by my dear brother Patrick. It will support 30 million farmers with digital climate advisory services. The Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation Program, supported by the African Development Bank and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has already delivered climate-resilient technologies for 11.2 million farmers in just 2 years. With the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, we expect to reach 40 million farmers. We plan to help farmers to produce 100 million metric tons of food, and that will be enough to feed 200 million people. And with that, we will cut the hunger in Africa down by 80%. I've been in this field for a lot of years. I've never been this passionate and convinced that actually achieving zero hunger in Africa is well within our reach. The African Adaptation Acceleration Program would provide $3 billion to finance support for youth-led businesses that are green businesses and their enterprises. The program will integrate climate resilience into $7 billion worth of infrastructure investments. It will also deploy innovative approaches to mobilize additional financing at scale to the private sector. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we don't need more facts. We need more finance. There is the fierce urgency of now, to quote former US President Barack Obama. And Mr. Secretary Blinken, it's good to see you here. Let's get started with the $12.5 billion. It's a down payment for a more resilient future. Thank you again for coming, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Akin, for your very strong words indeed. Let's turn to our next speaker, Alok Sharma. I know you're excessively busy running a COP. We're delighted for you being here with us, not only because you're the COP president, because also the UK is such a strong partner of the continent. Alok, please.
Well, I want to thank my dear friend Akinwumi for a really powerful speech. And we have learnt quite a lot already today, friends, but the one thing we have definitely learnt is that both Dr. Adesina and Patrick are available at 4 a.m. in the morning, if you want to call them. So test it. But Excellencies, it is indeed a pleasure to join you all, and I want to thank President Tshisekedi for bringing us together and for his inspiring speech. And I have to say to you, friends, that over the last year, I have traveled extensively in this role, and I've obviously spent time in Africa. I visited Ethiopia, Egypt, Kenya, Gabon, and Nigeria, and I have seen firsthand the terrible effects that climate change is having across the continent. And I could relay a whole range of testaments that I have received, but just a few days ago, I spoke to women in Madagascar who are having to cope with what some have described as the first climate-induced drought in the world. 4 years without rain. This is the bleak future that we are facing unless we get to grips with climate change. And these women told me that they can no longer farm. They can no longer farm because of climate change. And as we've just heard, the continent is responsible for just 3% of global emissions, 3%. And therefore I agree that the injustice is stark. And despite the energy and the commitment that I've seen in many African nations to adapt, a gulf has existed between the need and the international response. And that is why adaptation has been central to the UK's COP26 presidency, and that will continue in our presidency year. And of course, we've seen some progress. Under the UK presidency of the G7, every G7 nation has committed to increase finance for adaptation. And the UK and other countries have come together and they've committed to balance adaptation and mitigation spending. And yet, much more is needed. And I can promise you that I will continue, the UK presidency will continue to push these issues, both over this COP, but also in our presidency year. And we want to make progress on adaptation and the Santiago Network on loss and damage through the COP26 negotiations. And the UK will support and will continue to support adaptation in Africa. You will know that the UK met its commitment to spend £5.8 billion in climate finance between 2016 and 2020, and we are now doubling that commitment. It's a commitment that Prime Minister Johnson made in 2019 at the UN General Assembly, and we are sticking with it. And in that time, from 2016 to 2020, £2.7 billion went into adaptation, and around half of that went to Africa. And so today, we launch a package of measures to further our commitment to African adaptation. And as Dr. Adesina has already outlined, Prime Minister Johnson has announced that the UK is offering the African Development Bank a guarantee expected to unlock up to $2 billion of new financing. And half of this will help countries adapt to climate impacts, supporting the vital work of the AAAP. And I congratulate African leaders for championing the AAAP. And I'm encouraged that the program is mobilizing private capital alongside public funds, which is so vital. And of course, I welcome all the pledges that have been made today, and I have further pledges that may be made. And I can also announce an initial $197 million in new funding for African adaptation from the UK government. $27 million of this will support the AAAP upstream facility to deliver technical assistance and a pipeline of bankable projects. Altogether, the package that we announced today is expected to unlock almost $1.2 billion for adaptation in Africa, and there will be more to come. And so I encourage all leaders to give African adaptation the focus and the finance it deserves. As I say, and as you've heard from our colleagues, the need is great and the injustice is stark. So let's ensure that when we meet in Africa for COP27, the foundations of African adaptation and resilience are very firmly laid. Thank you.
Thank you, Alok Sharma, for your very strong words, but particularly also for your very strong commitment with concrete, material, significant resources towards the AAAP indeed. There is a little bit of a challenge as a moderator. Many leaders, limited time. Everybody wants to speak early and has to leave to another event. I get that. So I would like to suggest that we now do things in pairs. I'm going to just announce a couple of speakers in a line, so you're lined up for the next, for your next statement. Madagascar. Then I would like to go to the United States. Then WTO, and then Ghana, please. First, President Rajoelina. Madagascar, as already referenced, you're living on the front lines of the climate emergency, but you also have very clear ideas on what the solution should be. The floor is yours, sir.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État, Monsieur le Président de l'Union africaine, Monsieur le Président de la Banque africaine de développement, Monsieur le Président de la COP26, Madame la Directrice générale du Fonds monétaire international, honorable assistance. Les décideurs du monde entier sont réunis ici à Glasgow pour œuvrer à préserver l'avenir de l'humanité tout entière. Le réchauffement climatique n'épargne aucun continent. Les séries d'incendies, de sécheresses et d'inondations ont frappé plusieurs pays en Europe, en Amérique du Nord, en Asie du Sud et en Afrique. Et les conséquences sont désastreuses, et particulièrement pour le sud de mon pays, Madagascar, qui fait face à une famine causée par le changement climatique. Plus d'1,3 million de Malgaches sont dans une situation de détresse alimentaire. En effet, l'absence de pluie depuis plusieurs années consécutives a rendu impossible toute activité de subsistance. Mes compatriotes endurent le tribut d'une crise climatique à laquelle ils n'ont pas participé. Pour lutter contre cette injustice, Madagascar mise sur le développement de projets structurants pour apporter un changement radical et durable, notamment par la construction d'un grand pipeline pour alimenter en eau les terres et la population du sud de mon pays. Chers leaders, frères et sœurs, nos forêts sont les poumons de notre planète et aujourd'hui, ce patrimoine forestier mondial est en voie de disparition, plus particulièrement en Afrique et à Madagascar, où nous subissons une déforestation rapide. Si on schématise, les forêts sont comme sur des sables mouvants. Détruites par l'homme, elles disparaissent à grande vitesse et se transforment en désert. Chaque année, 3 900 000 hectares de forêts disparaissent en Afrique. Les principaux moteurs de la déforestation sont l'utilisation et la transformation de bois en charbon. 90% des ménages africains utilisent encore du charbon de bois pour cuire leurs repas. Et pourtant, pour obtenir 10 kg de charbon, il faut 100 kg de bois. Ainsi, chaque année, une famille détruit 1 hectare de forêt afin de subvenir à ses besoins. Comment stopper ce désastre? Madagascar plaide pour une transition énergétique en Afrique à travers le financement de solutions alternatives qui se substitueront du charbon de bois en vulgarisant l'utilisation des réchauds à base de bioéthanol et de gaz biogaz pour préserver nos forêts. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis convaincu que Madagascar, à l'image de l'Afrique, peut être la vitrine d'un développement vert et d'une émergence écologique. D'ailleurs, Madagascar est le 5e pays à avoir finalisé sa politique nationale d'adaptation au changement climatique. Nous avons d'ailleurs également signé notre premier contrat RED+, pour capter 10 millions de tonnes de carbone en 5 ans. Il faut agir maintenant, et c'est ici à Glasgow que cela doit être acté, car un seul mot, un seul geste, la volonté suivie d'action changera les choses. Ainsi, j'appelle les leaders du monde entier à accélérer la mobilisation des 100 millions de dollars de l'accord de Paris afin de financer une politique de transition énergétique en Afrique. Il faut agir aujourd'hui, mais pas demain, ni encore attendre en 2030. L'échec n'est pas une option. Nous devons réussir pour nous, pour notre nation et pour notre monde. La Terre qui nous a tout donné nous demande aujourd'hui de la sauver. Alors, sauvons l'Afrique, sauvons notre planète. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, also for highlighting that although it's complicated to implement adaptation action on the ground, Africa is not waiting, is moving forward. The next speaker is representing a government who is such a strong partner of Africa, was with us in last April during the COVID climate emergency meeting, in fact endorsed as one of the first development partners, the AAAP, Secretary of State. Lincoln, please.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you so much, not just for today, but for your leadership every day. It is greatly appreciated, and I simply want to start by thanking everyone who made this event possible, including President Tshisekedi, Chairperson of the African Union, Monsieur le Président, merci pour votre leadership, as well. And Dr. Adesina, greatly appreciate everything that you're doing as well. And to President Sharma, who I just saw on the way out, thank you as well. And I also want to extend thanks to Secretary General Guterres, Dr. Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, for all the work that they're doing, for all the focus that they're putting on this issue. We're spending a lot of time here today talking, and that's important because we are bringing a spotlight. We are bringing the world's attention to these critical issues. But we know that ultimately we are going to be judged not by what we say, but by what we do. And we've heard very important calls to action in the last 24 hours. Commitments are being made. We now have to follow up on them. We've been focused intently on stepping up our collective response to the climate crisis that threatens our planet, threatens our lives, threatens our futures. And as we're hearing today, one important way to do that is by working with countries that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. By helping those countries, by working together, by helping them adapt, we can mitigate some of the worst effects of the crisis and prevent future humanitarian emergencies. But more than that, we can also seize the opportunity that is here in this moment of necessity to build a better future, to build back better, to create greener economies, greener livelihoods, greener possibilities. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change has recognized Africa as the region on Earth most vulnerable to the climate crisis. The worst impacts, including, as we've already heard, prolonged droughts, record heat waves, food and water shortages, public health crises, instability, poverty. We know that they are hitting Africa with a special vigor. That's why governments, the private sector, civil societies across the region are working so intently already to adapt. The Africa Adaptation Initiative, launched by the African heads of state 6 years ago, is one very powerful example of this. Citizens and leaders across the region have seen what's coming, and they want to stop it. The world, especially those countries that contributed a great deal to the crisis in the first place, must stand up and help. The United States is committed to working in partnership with countries in the region to make real strides on this critical piece of the global response to the climate crisis. Just yesterday, President Biden launched the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, also known as PREPARE. This initiative will bring together agencies across the U.S. government to provide financial and technical support for vulnerable countries and communities at scale and with speed. The President will work with our Congress to dedicate $3 billion annually in adaptation finance by the year 2024. This is the largest commitment ever made by the United States to reduce the impact of climate change on those most endangered by it around the world. There are three other core elements to this initiative that I just wanted to highlight briefly. First, we intend to focus on knowledge, deepening understanding of climate risks, vulnerabilities, adaptation techniques, and supporting early warning systems and other informational tools that can save lives in climate emergencies. Second, we'll focus on plans and programs that support climate adaptation. And third, and as we've already heard very critically, we will focus on resources, mobilizing finance and private capital in service of adaptation projects. These three components of the PREPARE initiative are, I think, very well aligned with the pillars of the Africa Adaptation Initiative, which is why, as part of the rollout that we're doing, we'll be providing support to the African Adaptation Initiative directly. This will ensure effective implementation of the Accelerator program. We'll continue our work with the AU Commission and other African partners to shape and implement climate-smart policies across the continent. For example, on agricultural best practices. We were very proud to participate in the National Adaptation Planning Global Network to help countries in Africa develop practical, whole-of-government adaptation plans, and our work will continue with partners across the region to promote clean energy, prevent deforestation, and improve climate awareness. There's a very good reason that COP27 will be held in Africa, because this region is where a great deal of the world's attention needs to be, should be, as we work as fast as we can to prevent and mitigate the worst effects of the climate crisis, but also to seize the opportunities that are before us. This is a priority for the United States, and I'm grateful to everyone here for your commitment and especially for your partnership. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary of State. I think on behalf of all of us here in the room, I think it's fair to say how impressed we are with you, sir, for your leadership, not just at home, but also internationally, and particularly focusing on Africa. Your support for the Africa Adaptation Initiative is very well appreciated because the AAAP is actually the implementation vehicle of the AAI. So in that regard, there's a strong linkage here. So thank you so much, sir. Let's go to our next speaker, a speaker who has spearheaded adaptation back home for many, many years, a speaker who has called about the implementation need for adaptation and resilience for also many, many years. President Akufo-Addo, please.
Your Excellencies, as President of the Republic of Ghana and co-chair of the United Nations Eminent Group of Advocates for the Sustainable Development Goals, I'm delighted to participate in this historic Africa Adaptation Acceleration Summit. I thank the excellent President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Kwame Adesina, for the invitation. Amid the existential threat posed by climate change, this summit comes at a time when Africa is faced with one of its toughest challenges yet, the COVID-19 pandemic. There are challenges we must not only confront head-on, but one from which we must also emerge victorious. It's vital that we are united in action and do all we can as soon as possible to save lives, restore livelihoods, and spur the growth of our economies. Whilst ensuring this, it is incumbent on all of us to help protect our countries from future health, economic, and climate shocks. In Ghana, we're committed to promoting climate adaptation action, and that is why we're pleased to be collaborating with the Global Center on Adaptation, in close collaboration with the African Development Bank, in pioneering solutions on how to build durable infrastructure and supporting African cities to guard against the impacts of climate change. We're also working with the private sector and with the assistance of the Green Climate Fund to establish a multi-million-dollar green fund to support our climate adaptation interventions. We expect these initiatives to deliver tangible progress towards Ghana's adaptation and development objectives. By laying the foundation now, we bestow to future generations stronger, safer, and healthier communities. Africa has done the least to cause climate change, and yet our people, especially our youths, will suffer its impact the most. I therefore call on all Africans to support and join the fight against climate change. And in doing so, we must also collectively and with one voice demand that the developed nations of the world responsible for this phenomenon, 76% of global emissions comes from the West, that they make good on their promise of making available to the poorer nations of the world some 100 billion annually in climate finance, provide the requisite technology transfer to help us in the fight, and commit to debt for climate swap initiatives. It is imperative that, as enshrined in the SDGs, we protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and Excellency, we're delighted indeed to work with you as Global Center on Adaptation in Ghana, particularly on infrastructure, as you so eloquently described. Our next speaker is from Africa, is now at a global institution, makes the case why it is so important to link trade and climate change. And Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, please, you have the floor, madam.
Excellence, Monsieur le Président en exercice de l'Union africaine et Président de République démocratique du Congo, Excellencies, heads of state and government, co-conveners, my brothers Patrick and Akin, fantastic work, thank you for having us. Kristalina, friend and colleague, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to be able to join the African Adaptation Acceleration Summit. Africa's vulnerability to climate change is undoing much hard-won economic progress and development. The latest report by the Global Center for Adaptation, to which WTO was happy to contribute, projects that climate change will cause a 2 to 4% annual loss in GDP in Africa by 2040. Those who will suffer are poor people, women, a marginalized population. They'll bear the worst of it. Adaptation for Africa must be a priority for the international community. As we all know and we've said, this region contributes the least to emissions, but suffers the most. Climate finance for Africa to meet adaptation costs must be ramped up. Africa already faces $7 to $15 billion annually of adaptation costs. By 2050, it will be in the region of $50 billion annually. We also need to put in place trade policies to cushion against and adapt to the negative impacts of climate change. Trade is part of the solution. Trade is designed to help countries to diversify and adapt and be resilient. Let me illustrate. First, the climate threat to food security will be paramount for Africa. Yet trade can provide a response in many ways. When a country faces a shock from an extreme weather event, trade cushions the volatility of food markets by providing a vital flow of supplies to affected regions. Trade also helps economic diversification and productivity, provides access to inputs needed for climate-resilient agriculture, and there's a broader gain from trade, which reduces vulnerabilities by creating jobs and raising incomes. We also know that with action on agricultural tariffs, joined by trade facilitating measures, we could save 35 million people from suffering from climate-induced hunger, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Second, the WTO can also help lower barriers to trade for goods, services, and technologies that are essential for adaptation. Lowering trade barriers helps to stretch each dollar of adaptation finance further. This makes it more affordable to invest in cutting-edge technologies for addressing risks from sea level rise, drought, extreme weather events, and floods. To give an example, WTO data show that import tariffs levied on goods relevant to adaptation average about 10% in many African countries, with tariffs as high as 50% in some countries. Third, we need to make more and better directed climate finance to Africa. I said this before. The $100 billion promise must be made real to avoid a trust deficit. For Africa to be able to make supply chains resilient, we need a global effort to climate-proof the region's transport and other key trade-related infrastructure. Greater synergies between Aid for Trade, a program which the WTO coordinates with other international organizations, and climate finance programs are required. Currently, climate-focused programs represent only around 1/3 of overall Aid for Trade. We need to ramp this up, and we should also consider the role that the private sector can play in mobilizing funding. Just last week, I hosted Trade for Climate dialogues with major business leaders, and their message to COP26 was that trade must and can support climate adaptation. The blueprint for adaptation actions for the African continent set out in the recently launched GCA report is vitally important, and trade and the WTO can help realize these goals. Let me end by saying that right after COP26, we have the WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference. WTO members are working on various initiatives to promote the role of trade in addressing climate change and other environmental challenges. WTO stands ready to continue working with Africa to make trade a force for climate adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ngozi, for reminding us how important it is to liberate trade as a cushion for climate shocks, indeed. I have to say it's sort of a national transition, a natural transition, Ngozi, to go from you straight to Kristalina Georgieva. I think I do not exaggerate by saying there's no one else who makes the case so strongly about the links between climate risk and financial risk, but secondly, and as important, perhaps even more important, already drive that agenda within the IMF. I think we're all blessed, Kristalina, with you at the helm of the IMF. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick. Very kind of you to introduce me in this manner. I'm so thrilled to join President Tshisekedi and my dear brother Akin Adesina, who has been a fantastic leader for an institution that has put not only adaptation, but the broad objective of African-led development so squarely on the map. There are presidents, leaders here that have for years wrestled with tough challenges, never, ever bringing spirit down, always believing that we can, we must, we will do better. And I'm very honored for my institution to be your partner. Let me make 3 points since we are already quite advanced in time. The first one is that we are embracing resilience because we do live in a fast-changing and more shock-prone world. It is a must to build resilience of people that are educated, healthy, with good social protection when a shock hits, the resilience of our planet, our ecosystems, so it can continue to sustain humanity, and of course the resilience of our economies and our financial institutions. And that policies for resilience is what we have embraced in the IMF, and I'm proud to say we lead on. When we talk about policies for resilience, we recognize that we have the economic skills to make the case for putting them in place in a way that is efficient, effective, makes best use of money. What does that mean? We look for ways in which adaptation is more than adaptation. Adaptation can help with mitigation. When we protect our forests, when we restore the mangroves, they do so much to adapt our communities, but they also sink carbon. And the world, President Tshisekedi, the world must pay for that. We advocate for price on carbon, not only when we cut carbon emissions through energy, renewable energy, through clean transportation, but also when we cut carbon emissions by sinking carbon and restoring the ecosystems for the good of people. Adaptation is also development. When we build climate-smart agriculture that sustains droughts and sustains what Africa used to not have, rains that fall in 24 hours and destroy the crop, when we have resilient agriculture, it is more productive, it is great for development. Resilient infrastructure. When we build so it lasts and multiplies the impact, for example, a school that can also be a shelter, then we help communities to withstand shocks. When we empower women, African women are the strength of the continent. And when women are empowered, communities are so much better. And we also recognize that building strong internet connectivity means access to data. And if a drought is coming or rains are coming, we know it in advance, and we can use data to improve the performance of our economies. This is what we promote from the IMF. We also promote removing obstacles, and this is my second point, removing obstacles to adaptation. For example, lack of access to insurance, lack of access to credit. Financial stability is only strong when people can access financial resources so their families and their communities are stronger. And my third point is about money. We do have to raise more financing for adaptation. The 100 billion seems to be coming. Bravo. We heard earlier in an earlier session that we might be there, but they would only do good if they go where they would make the biggest difference. And that means fairly splitting for mitigation and adaptation. At the fund, we believe that this must be done. And bravo, my brother Akin, for what you have achieved. We at the fund also help for countries to have fiscal space to deal with these challenges, including adaptation. Our historic $650 billion new special drawing rights allocation brought fresh resource with no additional debt to everybody here in this room. But we have to do more. And the leaders of Africa know what I'm talking about. Make sure that part of the SDRs that went to countries that don't really need it can be moved to countries that need it for poverty reduction and, yes, for climate resilience. We are creating a new resilience and sustainability trust that will provide long-term financing for countries so they can take the turn to a more resilient future. There is a phrase I love, Ben Okri. We can redream the world and make the dream come true. And that is what we have to do, or otherwise, the women in Madagascar that have seen no rain, they would be having nightmares. So for a dream that comes true for the betterment of all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristalina, indeed, not only for the dream, but for making that dream a reality indeed, for putting women center and also focus on youth development and making adaptation part and mainstream of development. That's precisely what the AAAP is about. I know, Excellencies, we're running out of time. Leaders have to make statements in other rooms anytime soon, but I would like to call on President Assoumani of the Comoros, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président de la Conférence de l'Union africaine, Madame la Présidente de FMI, Monsieur le Président de la BAD, Mesdames et Messieurs, le thème de l'adaptation au changement climatique qui nous réunit ce matin est essentiel, étant donné que la gravité de la situation qui prévaut dans notre continent n'est plus à démontrer. Je me permets d'ailleurs de souligner que cette situation est encore plus critique dans les petits pays, dans les petits États insulaires en développement, dont mon pays fait partie. Mon pays fait face, en effet, non seulement à la montée des eaux, aux cyclones, aux tremblements de terre, aux inondations, mais aussi aux érosions et à la menace volcanique, et par conséquent, la recherche des solutions idoines à la question des changements climatiques est pour nous une question de survie. Force est de dire que bien que des étapes importantes aient été franchies par nos différents pays, toutefois, le réchauffement climatique reste toujours une menace pour la survie de nos pays et de nos populations. Pour des pays comme les nôtres, qui dépendent énormément de l'agriculture et des ressources naturelles, la mise en œuvre urgente des mesures d'adaptation devient en effet incontournable. C'est ainsi que mon pays s'est décidé de réduire sensiblement ses émissions de gaz à effet de serre d'ici 2030, malgré sa faible émission, et de poursuivre l'objectif qu'il s'est fixé d'être un puits de carbone et de renforcer sa politique de reboisement et de création des parcours marins. Et c'est ainsi que nous sommes engagés dans une vaste campagne de reboisement sur environ 10% du territoire à l'horizon 2030, ce que nous appelons un Comorien en arbre. Nous avons également promulgué en 2019 la loi sur le système national des aires protégées et 5 nouveaux aires protégées sont en cours de mettre en place. Nous avons en outre pris des initiatives pour accroître l'indépendance énergétique à travers le développement de la géothermie et du photovoltaïque, afin de relancer l'économie nationale en soutenant la croissance verte essentielle à notre survie. Et dans ce cas-là, je dois remercier très sincèrement mon frère, le président de la BAD à Dessina, qui nous a vraiment appuyés dans ce projet. Toutefois, si nous voulons que nos pays, qui sont déjà affectés par la pauvreté et le sous-développement, et qui depuis 2 ans maintenant traversent des situations économiques difficiles à cause de la Covid-19, pérennisent ces initiatives prises au niveau national, nous devons concrétiser nos engagements politiques, notamment en facilitant l'accès aux sources de financement. Mon pays, qui ambitionne de devenir un pays émergent à l'horizon 2030, a besoin de cet accompagnement incontournable, et notamment celui du Fonds spécial multilatéral. Honorable assistance, l'heure est venue de traduire nos discours en action afin de préserver notre planète, qui est durement affectée par les effets des changements climatiques. La vie quotidienne de nos populations est durement impactée par les conséquences des catastrophes naturelles qui se font de plus en plus violentes. Sans un accompagnement conséquent, nos pays auront du mal à mettre en place de façon pérenne les mesures d'adaptation nécessaires, et ce, en dépit de leur volonté politique. Aussi devons-nous faire de cette COP26 le sommet de la mobilisation et de l'engagement afin de donner espoir à nos populations qui n'ont que trop souffert et de laisser aux générations futures un héritage digne de nous. Messieurs, Mesdames, je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for your strong leadership on this topic indeed, and also reminding us that this is not easy. Adaptation investments are not easy. They cost upfront financing, and partners indeed are requested to support this. I know we're running out of time, but I would like to recognize first Sierra Leone, President, followed by Canada. So let's go to Sierra Leone. Mr. President Madabio, Pew, the floor is yours, sir.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my dear brothers, although Africa is responsible for only 3% of emissions, Africa is most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The resulting 2 to 4% annual loss in GDP in the region by 2040 will most adversely affect the young, women, rural, and at-risk populations. With projected yield reduction at about 10 to 20% as a result of the impact of climate change, Africa's food security is at risk. We are encouraged by the concerted effort to support adaptation actions and many important initiatives to stave off the effect of climate change. However, the speed and scale of adaptation action are grossly insufficient, partly because many stakeholders are not connected to possible resources, investment, knowledge, expertise, or support. I'm informed that Africa received only 4% of tracked global climate finance in 2017-2018. Resilience and adaptation initiatives remained grossly underfunded at only 6 billion. This falls far behind the 7 to 15 billion that was needed by 2020 per year and 50 million per year by 2050. Africa needs an innovative program to address its climate vulnerability. That is why I welcome the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, the AAAP, jointly designed by the African Development Bank and the Global Center on Adaptation. Based on the vision of the Africa Adaptation Initiative presented by the African leaders at COP26 in 2015. I'm encouraged that the AAAP focuses on 4 bold areas derived from NDCs, national adaptation plans, and other national, regional climate change strategies. Those are areas where action on and investment in adaptation and resilience building can yield high dividends and to achieve SDGs. Unlike other adaptation plans in Africa, I'm also pleased that the Triple AP is a comprehensive adaptation that addresses the nexus of climate change, COVID-19, and the economy. It will mobilize 25 billion new and additional money for Africa's adaptation. I commend the African Development Bank for already committing to provide half this money by 2025. Thank you, Mr. President of the African Development Bank. I welcome the implementation of the Triple AP through two well-thought-out facilities: an upstream facility housed at the Global Center on Adaptation and an investment facility housed at the African Development Bank. I call on our partners to support these facilities financially to enable the building of these of resilience that Africa needs to achieve sustainable development goals. I thank you, Mr. Chair of the African Union, for leading this initiative, and I pledge my full support to make sure it succeeds. Thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for your very strong words indeed. Our next speaker is actually just a week in a job, and that's why it's so important he is here with us today to make adaptation for Africa a central pillar of his portfolio. Last Friday, I had the privilege of hosting Prime Minister Trudeau at the Global Center on Adaptation in Rotterdam, but I'm delighted to have here Stephen Gilbert, Canada, please.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Merci, c'est un honneur de m'adresser à un auditoire de si haut calibre, tous et toutes supporters de l'action d'adaptation au changement climatique en Afrique. Des chefs d'État, des dirigeants des Nations Unies, des représentants et représentantes de gouvernements et d'organisations internationales. Monsieur le Président Tshisekedi, Monsieur le Président, ainsi que le Président de la COP26, Monsieur Sharma, qui a dû nous quitter, Your Excellencies, honored guests and interveners, thank you. I am very proud to be here on behalf of Prime Minister Trudeau and Canada, et d'ajouter ma voix aussi à celle des pays qui s'expriment aujourd'hui en faveur des pays africains. La triple crise des changements climatiques, de la perte de biodiversité et de la pandémie de la COVID-19 fait de cette période un véritable défi dans l'histoire de l'humanité, des défis qui ne connaissent pas de frontières. Et dans le contexte de l'Afrique, leur urgence est encore plus grande. If we do not act with appropriate haste, farmers and workers will face more heat waves. Cities and other settlements will face more rainfall. De nombreuses communautés en Afrique sont déjà confrontées à des stress climatiques dans les domaines de l'agriculture, de la santé, de la nutrition et des conditions de vie. Les gens fuient vers des communautés surpeuplées et à haut risque, ou bien ils se lancent dans de dangereux voyages de migration. Nous sommes nombreux ici à connaître ces réalités. Alors, que faire? Un point de départ essentiel est le financement de l'adaptation, qui est indispensable au succès de la COP26, en particulier pour les pays vulnérables de l'Afrique. That's why Canada has doubled our international climate finance to $5.3 billion earlier this year. From within this contribution, I'm proud to announce 3 new adaptation finance commitments at COP26. First, we'll continue our support to the Least Developed Countries Fund by contributing $37.5 million over 5 years in order to help some of the most vulnerable nations adapt to climate change. Second, we will make our first ever contribution of up to $10 million to the Adaptation Fund. And third, we will also provide up to $10 million for the National Adaptation Program Global Network, which will help developing countries create and implement adaptation plans to protect against the worst impacts of climate change. I'm also pleased to announce today that we will increase our provision of funding towards climate adaptation to at least 40% to help developing countries build the capacity to tackle climate change and become more resilient. Cette contribution complémente les 133 millions de dollars au Fonds Canada Banque africaine de développement pour le climat, qui vise à renforcer les droits économiques des femmes et leur participation à l'action climatique. Cela fait partie d'une approche de l'aide en Afrique qui poursuit notre politique d'aide internationale féministe. Notre objectif est de nous concentrer sur les besoins des populations les plus pauvres et les plus vulnérables de la société et de soutenir des programmes qui touchent à la fois l'adaptation, le climat et le droit des femmes. Climate adaptation is unlike many other aspects of our efforts to contain global warming. It is about climate change as people experience it on their doorsteps, of their homes and in their communities. It's about how human beings can achieve a decent quality of life in the face of unprecedented climatic upheaval. We're here at COP. We must remember that ensure adaptation also reaches the people who need it the most, where they need it the most. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Honourable Minister, for your strong words, and also for your strong new commitments of Canada launched today. We're almost coming to a close of this very important and actually first Africa Adaptation Acceleration Summit meeting. So I'm now delighted to invite back to the podium President Tshisekedi to share some reflections on how to take the outcome of this meeting forward. Thank you, sir.
Bien. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, distingués invités, nous avons entendu de nombreuses voix aujourd'hui, des voix d'engagement, des voix d'action. Votre participation présage d'un avenir plus brillant et plus résilient pour l'Afrique. Je tiens à remercier les voix qui nous ont soutenus, notamment celle du secrétaire général des Nations Unies, ici absent, de la présidence de la COP26, de l'initiative pour l'adaptation en Afrique, du Centre mondial sur l'adaptation et de la Banque africaine de développement, ainsi que celle de nombreux autres chefs d'État et de dirigeants du monde. Excellences, les voix de l'Afrique étaient claires. Nous devons intensifier l'adaptation. Le temps des projets pilotes est terminé. Nous ne pouvons plus attendre. Nous devons agir ensemble et vite. Les inondations et les sécheresses, l'érosion côtière et les cyclones, les vagues de chaleur torride sont de plus en plus intenses. Nos cultures, nos villes, nos enfants doivent être protégés face à l'urgence climatique que nous traversons. Nous avons à peine contribué à cette crise mondiale, mais nous la ressentons chaque jour. J'ai dit au début de cette rencontre, et je vais le répéter, l'Afrique ne reçoit pas assez d'argent pour l'adaptation. Nous ne recevons que 6 milliards de dollars par an. Nous avons besoin de 33 milliards de dollars. Nous ne pouvons plus attendre. Le monde a promis 100 milliards de dollars. Le monde a promis plus d'argent pour l'adaptation. Le monde doit tenir sa promesse. Nous avons annoncé nos engagements à faire ce qui est attendu de nous dans le cadre des contributions déterminées au niveau national, les NDC, mais nous ne pouvons pas le faire seuls. Nous ne sommes pas la cause de ce problème. Nous avons besoin de partenaires pour le résoudre. Mesdames et Messieurs, il ne nous reste que quelques jours pour cette COP26. Nous avons un plan d'action qui nous appartient et qui est piloté par l'Afrique. Il est ciblé, il est ambitieux et il a notre soutien. Ce plan permettra de faire face au triple impact de la récession économique, de la pandémie persistante et des ravages de la crise climatique dans nos pays. Grâce à la Banque africaine de développement, la moitié de ce plan est prise en charge. Nous avons besoin que le monde finance l'autre moitié. Excellences, ne quittons pas Glasgow sans un engagement ferme d'au moins 6 milliards de dollars en faveur du programme d'accélération de l'adaptation en Afrique. Faisons en sorte d'arriver à la COP27 avec le solde. 25 milliards de dollars sur 5 ans sont largement insuffisant pour combler le déficit en matière d'adaptation en Afrique. Mais cette enveloppe permettra de renforcer la confiance entre l'Afrique et ses partenaires. Elle permettra d'intensifier les actions et de produire des résultats qui inspireront d'autres pays. L'adaptation n'est pas le problème de quelques-uns. L'adaptation en Afrique a besoin de tout le monde. Nous avons besoin de vous. Rejoignez-nous. Merci beaucoup et à très bientôt.
Thank you so much, President Tshisekedi, for your very strong words and also for your vision on how to drive this agenda forward. Before we really close this meeting, I would like to give the opportunity to my friend and big brother, President Adesina, to share his reflections on this very important meeting, after which I would come to close this meeting. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm not going to take any more time. I just want to say that, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, your presence at this meeting demonstrates that you care, demonstrates that you're listening, demonstrates that you are committed to making sure that we have a space to breathe in Africa with all the deluge we're getting on climate change. And so you're being here, it's really very important for us to know that the world is partnering with Africa as we launch this very, very important program to allow Africa to adapt to what actually it didn't create. I'd like to particularly thank His Excellency, President Felix Tshisekedi, the chairperson of the African Union, but also the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, for your leadership, for your commitment, for your eloquence in carrying our voice, Africa's voice, on the global stage. And as I listened to you as you came back here, you came back to the same thing, that we cannot leave Glasgow without getting the floor, which is basically getting the $8 billion that is needed as a down payment of trust for Africa. And I want to thank you because you're doing an incredible job for us as our leader in Africa. I'd like to thank all the heads of state and government that have been here. I just want to say that baobab tree is the most important tree in Africa. It's big, it's large. And you can't put your hands around it yourself. If you want to really do baobab tree, you need many hands around it. And what I see here tonight, or this afternoon, are many hands, many committed hands around the baobab trees. Of climate adaptation, there's strong political support, there's very strong financial support, there's very strong partnership. There is commitment for accelerated implementation, because as we speak, I think we are reminded also by President of Madagascar how crucial that is, and that it's very important for us to also leverage money. Whatever monies we get, we'll leverage the private sector so that we can deliver more at scale. As I close, I'd just like you to look at the person next to you from a distance that is actually COVID-19 compliant. And since the baobab tree, you can do your hands like this and say, well, let's go and do it. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Akin, for your strong words indeed. And I think it's, in summary and closing of this meeting, is that the impacts of climate change are at Africa's doorsteps today. Thousands of lives, millions of livelihoods are impacted today. And the future will be worse if we don't take action now. Because for Africa, and it sounds like hyperbole, it's adapt or die. So the understanding of this crisis and the commitments we heard today are indeed unprecedented. Africa has a plan. The world must listen. To speak with your words, Akin, the world must join the hands of African leaders that have said loud and clear, we will make Africa adapted to climate change. You have heard the African leaders today 12.5 billion over 5 years is not enough, not nearly enough to finance a resilient Africa. The African countries, as you said, President Tshisekedi, need 33 billion a year. The world promised 100 billion. It must be possible to mobilize these resources. I want to thank the COP26 presidency, the Africa Adaptation Initiative, the IMF, WTO, the United States. I see John Kerry here is with us as well, a strong advocate for adaptation in Africa. We heard Canada. We heard all the African leaders. And I think also those who joined us in April who couldn't speak today, Remy Rieu, AFD, Roger Voorhees, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Norway, Sweden, we're all in. And I think, President Tshisekedi, if I may, we walk out of this hall with renewed energy and an incredible level of commitment. AAAP action is on its way. We are moving. And the mobilization of additional resources for Africa is on the way. Scaling up adaptation in Africa, indeed, is unstoppable. Thank you very much indeed. And we will be back for our next meeting on this very important topic. Please count us in. Thank you very much indeed.